Good evening, and welcome to this evening's panel. We're going to have a discussion with Michelle Elsai and Arthur Weber. This is just one of the panel discussions, and they're all organized to give you more insight about the exhibition, about the art, the artists, their way of thinking. The title, very well known by now, Refracted Identity, Shared Futures, knows three themes: cosmos, temporality, and connectivity. And for this discussion, we're going to dive into temporality, and we're going to look at the fluidity of time and its connection to the human experience. And this then also brings me to the title of this panel, which is Temporal Narratives in Contemporary Art, Exploring the Creative Dimensions of Time. So we're going to see if time is actually something that is used as an inspiration or just expressed because it's there, because time is always all around us. And I'm going to do this, as said, with Michelle Elsai, a multimedia artist originally from Bahrain, now living in New York, but very soon moving to Riyadh, and Arthur Weber, Estonian and living in Riyadh, working there as well, of course. He is renowned for his expertise in interactive art installations. This is obviously a very, very short introduction, but I'm going to ask both artists to tell a bit more about themselves and their practice. So if I may ask Michelle to start.
Sure. Hi. Hello, good evening. Thank you for having me, first of all. As you well mentioned, I'm a multimedia artist from Bahrain. I primarily work with folktales from Bahrain, and primarily folktales relating to land and the ways in which I am unpacking personal and collective narratives throughout these installations, including video, sound, and photography. The work that I have in Riyadh is Sea of Tears, which is an installation inspired by Ain Adari, which is a natural spring in Bahrain that dried up in the early 90s and has been converted into a public swimming pool that is also not accessible now to public. So I was thinking a lot about these inherited spaces through mind and memory, and the way in which a land that is so riddled by folktale can be transformed into these different stages of remembrance. The work itself is glass, sound, and 2 video screens. And I'm really thinking about the process of transforming a material from one state to another. So within each of these glass pieces is al-jilban, or frankincense, that is combusted, is in this like crazy state of transformation. And yet during the actual experience of the work in Riyadh, it's a very silent, quiet constellation of glassworks. So I was really interested in the dichotomy there. I think I went a little over in talking about introduction, so I'm going to pass it on to Arthur.
No, it's fascinating. I want to ask you more about it after. So my name is Arthur Weber. I'm an artist at Riyadh that you probably have seen my work, Inner Waves, which is an interactive piece with the water and the sound. So it's if we talk about the time and the ephemerality and the temporality, this piece is it basically only exists when people start interacting with it. Of course, it waits for people to come to wake it up and start participating, and but that's what makes the work active, in a way. So, and I think that's what fascinates me, and that's what I've been trying to do with my practice as well, the work that is both ephemeral and but at the same time tangible, something that you can see and interact with, and that comes to life when people start interacting with it. So
Yeah, the way I see your work also is like, of course, it's visually very beautiful when you just enter the space because of the setup. And like you really thought about that, of course, as well. But it's indeed the interaction that tells then the story. But I would like to go back to Michelle for a bit because you were already mentioning your work, Sea of Tears. And there's a huge story behind that, actually, sort of like that's important to know to be able to understand the artwork and what you did. So maybe you can share that story with us to get more into details.
Yeah, of course. So I mentioned that I work primarily with folktales from the region. I work primarily with, over the past 3 years, the tale of the Virgin of Adari. So the story is that there was a woman who was in a palm tree grove who was approached by a menacing man, and she begins to weep. And so her tears and her body transform into the spring itself. So in a sense, it's also an origin story of the water mass. And since that origin story, there are very many other fractured tales that have been told about the space. I was in another show earlier last year, almost a year ago now, and again with the subject matter of Ain Adari, and I heard of a different telling of the story in which a woman went to a palm tree grove and was crying because her family wouldn't let her marry the love of her life. And so these are two competing folk tales that are telling very different stories or capturing very different stories about the culture in which it's telling that story about. And that's what I find so fascinating about folk tales, is that it captures histories on the fringes that perhaps wasn't put into a larger understanding of place.
And then if you think of this story and the way you expressed it in the end, how you created your art piece, and you combine it with the idea of time and temporality, how would that fit into it? And is that something that you might have done on purpose, or that it just existed because it was there? Like, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think in the concept of relating the work and the folktale to time is both subliminal but also very evident in that folktales are devout of time. They seem to exist above time, and very similar to Arthur's work in that, you know, you are engaging, you activate the work with the presence of, the retelling, or the presence of the interaction with the piece. It's very much metabolized by participation. And that's what's so beautiful about oral histories, is that they are metabolized as they are passed through a lineage. That definitely metaphorically or almost conceptually ties my work with time. But I think also in terms of capturing these frankincense pieces or these al-Chilbans pieces into the glass, what happens is it captures that moment of transformation in a very violent way, and yet renders a final product that's very silent. And that's dichotomy of time as well, or time frozen into these pieces, is what I find another kind of dimension to addressing the concept of temporality.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I also see that when I see the work, and what emphasizes more even, I think, is the fact that you then also film the process of making the glass pieces, and that's showing there then too even more emphasizing on the moment of creating these pieces. Arthur, Michelle was already mentioning just now about your work also, and sound is very important in your work, and it comes to life the moment people interact, but it's like really also art and technique, but yet it's very intuitive from the way you've created it to when people interact with it. Can you explain a little bit more about that part?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of like technology, when I use I only use technology like to amplify the senses or the idea, like because like my background is in advertising, and we used to say that execution is not an idea, and so is technology. It's only exists to help to understand better what is the message, what are you trying to say, what is actually important, and I think in this case, like honestly, like I'm really fascinated with the technology because it can make, like, I don't want to say magic, but it makes things it makes people wonder, and question, they question, like, how does this work, what's like what it can do, what I can do with it, and it kind of like evokes this, like, a sense of like wonder and questioning the life, and this is when we get inspired as humans, that's how when we start questioning reality, when we get more curious about the life that surrounds us, like the objects, what can we do with that? So it's like sort of like a kids, like when they start like breaking things so that they would understand better like how it works to begin with.
To follow that, I also consider the way you're working with technology as a material rather than a process. Like there's this two worlds that are converging in the work, and that, you know, there's a consideration of the process of creating this, and at the same time the site is the technology as well, so it's the tangibility of it.
Yeah. And I like to say as well, like sometimes about my work, that I make spaces for things to happen. So in this case, this like blue room that you enter in, it becomes like a different realm, like where the time stops, or the time doesn't matter, or it's irrelevant, and I kind of like, as I was creating the piece, I was always considering the basic, like the main senses, like the human senses, the smell, the taste, the touch, and so I use the smell as well in the room, so that it calms down, like calms people like as they enter it, and the sounds, like the sounds are tuned to relax. The installation itself is like it's lower, so that it has like the grounding effect, like so that I want people to sit down and relax and like stop for a moment, and in this case, like, yeah, it's like I am also using time in this work, but like I'm kind of like making time stop, like so that we can enjoy and like and relax a little bit, and because at the same time, like we live in like a very fast pace, and Riyadh as well, with all these changes, it's like it's like a rocket ship, like flying. Like,
well, the way you describe it, it's very much a spiritual experience when you go into the space and interact with the artwork. That is even more emphasized by the sounds that are there, because they feel very grounded. The title of your piece is Inner Waves, but it's also very much about your inner voice, trying to find that, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about those voices and what they mean to you, and how you composed that?
so with the voices, I called it the inner. Basically, this work is part of the overall series, like related to inner voice, and it's called Inner Waves. Basically, connects the water element and the water within ourselves, with the water that you touch, and through that, I wanted to kind of like to help to bring out the voice, the inner voice of a person who participates in the work. So basically, like I want people to hear their own voices, like within the work. But of course, it's like it's very speculative. It's difficult to work with the things that like with the emotions that people that you want people to have. Like so. And what was guiding me is like I wanted people to hear their voice, like maybe for the first time in a day or like in a while, and really like really remind them that like you have your voice inside you, and that's why I use mostly the voices in the work. So when you touch the water, you hear the voice, and it's a human voice. And sometimes it's not all sounds are voices, but the thing is, like, we don't really think with words. Like, we think with visions and emotions, and this is how we store our memories, like not in a verbal way, but in an emotional, kind of like archiving.
The sounds are almost very guttural,
yeah,
and very visceral,
yes,
in that sense. It's almost surprising for me to hear that the work is of human voices, because it felt very much like another, and I think that's in my experience of accessing the work, which I think that becomes a very primal understanding of what an inner voice can be, which I think is extremely successful for, you mentioned this in terms of stepping out of the context of time and into the context of us as viewers, as artists participating in this show at this time in Riyadh, in a space where time is, escalating exponentially, to have a kind of like a safe haven within an installation.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty much like what are you doing with the capsule, like with the how you encapsulate the senses, like within the glass, within the piece. It's like it's trapped, but you can see it, like you can.
It's almost a little bit of a tease to know that they're frankincense, because people tend, upon hearing that it's al-Jalban or frankincense, they tend to want to smell the smell, but it's inaccessible. And I think about a lot how our works are different but very much very alike, and that there's a sensory deprivation and there's a sensory heightening on the other side, and perhaps the work that Sea of Tears is extremely personal. Yours is both personal and collectively personal. So there's kind of a recognition of like the collective inner voice. I'm almost apolitical personhood. So it's interesting to think how the two spaces are engaging with the concept of temporality from kind of the artist's voice as a collective and as an individual.
Yeah, and what of course what you already also mentioned before when we were talking is how that you could see sort of like a similarity between your two works, even though they are so very different. And there with you, there's the voice, there's the mouth, and with you, there's like the voice of mouth to be able to keep on telling the story and explain what is happening, and that is also something that goes over time, obviously. And with Arthur's work, I was wondering, like for instance, if you find your inner voice, you're interacting with the piece, and you find that now, and let's say in 2 years' time you would interact with it again, would your inner voice still be the same, or would it have changed because of experiences? Those are all very interesting aspects to me to think about, also in regards of time and temporality. And these two pieces that we are now talking about, of course, are just for each of you one piece of your oeuvre, but maybe there are other pieces that you've created that emphasize even more or time or on passing time. So, Arthur, are there other pieces that would give this example?
Yeah, there is an ongoing project that I started working on this project in maybe 2016, and since then it kept changing. You probably will see it on one of these slides with the images of Alula and the stones, and the project is called Time in the Mind of the Beholder. It's basically saying that we all perceive time differently. Like basically time is a human-made construct. But if for a moment we would abstract from that and thinking that what is time for me? Like how do I perceive time? Like as a human, I would probably like have maybe like, I don't know, 100 years, give or take, like, or 80 or 60, like, but if I'm a mosquito, maybe a week, a butterfly, or like how much time do we have, like, and oh, you see, this was the project that I was talking about, and in that project I was imagining myself like if I were a stone, the time would be completely different for me. Like I would see the oceans, the sky, like the days. Would the days still matter if I see like a million of them, or how would that work? And so yeah.
No, that's. I mean, I think it's really interesting to think about art as an index, right? Like you, in that moment of time, contemplating these very existential questions about, our place within the construct of a human-made time, but then also thinking about us as artists within this context of a light festival. What is that indexing about the ways in which we are thinking about these materials at present and how our works are in conversation to each other? And so I think it's almost interesting to be an artist in this day and age because you kind of act like a time traveler, like both being very aware of the present moment and also contemplating the past and the future. And I think perhaps I've been thinking a lot about science fiction in my work and thinking about like urban futures as a part of my addressing of land, both imagined land, but also real and historical sites that have been a huge cultural site for, a collective history.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you're also making, that you're really the voice of this time, and that always has been the case, of course, with artists. Like it's always reflecting that specific time that they're working in. And then you can even emphasize more and look more at the fact of like what's happening, what's time and what's timing, and how long, as Arthur just said, like how long do we have, like how long do we live, how long does a fly live, how long does an animal live, and that there are all these notions that we can take into considerations, and artists, writers, critics can all sort of like absorb and use in their expression. And I think that is what you have been doing as well. And maybe it's not always the concrete idea of like I'm working with time now, but in the end that's what you end up doing anyway, because like it's all time related. So therefore maybe time is just a given and an inspiration for always and for everything that we do. And added to that, and that may not be only time, but like when you create an artwork, or any artist creates an artwork, you have a story to tell, you want a story to tell, you have an idea, you have an instinct or an inspiration, but it doesn't necessarily mean that when the viewers, visitors see your art pieces, that they exactly pick up on that part. They might see something else because of the time that they are in, the time that they have passed, the experience they have, their cultural baggage. I mean, it all plays a role also for the artist, like where you grow up, what your baggage is. It's all brought into account, I think. I mean, that also goes for you very much so, Michelle, I think, with the stories you choose to tell through your artworks. You said already before that you use these stories more, these old stories. Like, are there other examples that you can share with us?
Yeah, I actually want to just tag along to that concept that you're mentioning about, the time being a space in which you can think about the labor of work. And what you choose to present as a question, I think, is incredibly important, especially within the context, both historically, politically, socially, thinking about what sort of narratives resonate and what concerns do we have I think especially as we think about, rapid urbanization, but also climate futures, like how are we thinking about the state of our land and our economy in a way that is both personal, deeply personal, but also massively collective. And the question, thank you for asking about folk tales that I also work with. I primarily work with Ain Hadari as of the past 4 years, and I think that the reason why it's really like taken my research wholeheartedly is because it marries a lot of the themes that I'm interested in, including water as it relates to the female body, including memory, including the destruction of land and the transformation into the spiritual. And so I actually have a different series which is called False Pools, where I try to reimagine new sites in which this heroine has cried, or her tears had been shed. So thinking about all the other sites that had been destroyed due to human interference.
That's very interesting. I'm all of a sudden also thinking that you were talking about water and human body and then the tears. I mean, it's a very beautiful similarity there, actually. And then you using the water again also in your installation as a transmittant to be able to bring the inner voice out from the persons interacting with your art
well,
piece.
actually, with Arthur, I just came to the thought that water is also very cleansing, right? And so to think about to find an inner voice, one must cleanse one's hands, can be a very poetic understanding of the space itself. I wonder if that's something that you were thinking about as well.
I just like got distracted by my thoughts, like when when I thought as like. Actually, like the time, like the water, and like if we're talking about the water and the time, and like one thing that we can bring also like is a memory, and something that we discussed earlier about, so like how we pass through our bodies the knowledge and instincts and other information to other generations, and like what if the water serves as like this raw medium, like if you would, because we are made of water, so but water is a pure material that kind of like I don't want to say contaminated by our thoughts and our all that, like our human presence and the information and all our histories and memories that we're going through, like that's like even the algorithms that like are built in our DNA with the intuition and the generations of like of memories.
Well, also when thinking about like the womb itself as being a watery, like our first home being the watery womb of our mothers, like that's another way of thinking about like our nativity to water masses, and then in etymology itself thinking about the waters of emotion, and there's especially within the words or the verbiage that we use with water, it very much tied to emotion. And I think that that's interesting parallel, especially as you're relating it to instinct. It seems that water is something that unites us and is a valuable resource undeniably across the board. And so to think about ways in which we are regurgitating, but also contemplating the seas, the oceans, the rivers, as sites of emotional resonance is like incredibly profound.
I just remember something like basically from where I'm from, like which is like Estonia, it's like Nordic countries. We used to have these like we still have shamans, basically, and one of the things that they use, it's basically they call, I don't remember how it's called. It's like it's casting the spells. So and one particular exercise or spell is that you take a glass of water, and you whisper into that water what you want, the like not from life, but like the things like your desires from other person, and you give it to other person to drink, and then when they drink it, it's kind of like you're passing the command, and that's also like talking a little bit about the programming and like of other human.
Well, it's interesting because I think that so many of these rituals include water. They're also like, I mean, in Islam, the way that it's wadda, or we, in preparation for prayer, use water to cleanse. I think that's also a very beautiful practice. Also, in a lot of other indigenous traditions, the water dances in Native America, but also I found in my research that there is a very similar folktale to Ain Adari in Mexico called La Llorana, which is the crier. It's a story of an older woman who kind of lives on the fringes of lakes, preying on young children. And so it's almost like a folktale to warn children to stray away from home, because this old wretched woman who is crying will capture you and eat you. And so it's interesting to think about how this like concept of water, tears, emotion are entirely linked.
I'm now just wondering, when I'm following this train of thoughts, whether this would alter your own vision to your own work, like thinking of all these things. I mean, because it's so related, and then all of a sudden both your works are even more related than you would think at first sight. But I'm curious whether that changes your perception of your own piece now. It's a question to both of you.
For me, I think I will need to wait for a couple years and see, and if I would get back to it, and I'll see like how it changes, because I believe it will change, because we never stay the same person, even though we believe we are.
No.
But
yeah, I think every time I produce a work, I'd never really finished. So even in this work, I like finished it the day of the opening, and I was like, okay, yes, but there are so many other questions that generated from the experience, and it's also great to kind of like capture that, as Arthur said, take a step back and almost be more of a perceiver than someone who is actionably responding. I'm definitely interested in sound and water. I think we discussed this earlier in our prior meeting. I don't know where that will take me, but that's definitely one line of thinking that is generated out of this work.
Yeah, well, and what of course is also very beautiful, that you keep on working until it needs to be exhibited, and then yet again, it's a moment in time, the moment that it's finished, and that's that moment that you're showing, and that's the story that you're sharing, and whether people are exactly taking that story with them is an entirely different thing, but it's also very interesting being that frame of mind, that moment in time. I think that goes for both of you, and maybe with you even more so, Arthur, that you've created it, but because it's interactive, it keeps on telling different stories over time with different people, because people are interacting with it in the way they do. But my question that I already wanted to ask before, you had this idea of it being spiritual, being kind of a meditation, and now that you've seen people interact with it more, do people react to it in a way that you expected them to, or is it different?
Yeah, that's a thing, really. Like when I was building the work, I was thinking about it as like as a spiritual piece, because it was always like just me and my work, and then at the opening day when I finally the audience came and I saw these like 10 people interacting with it at the same time, it really became a playground. It's like even though I was like thinking it would be spiritual and like very deep, but just people want to play, and that's fine. Like that's also an experience, and for me, like seeing like how people just enjoy it and laugh, and this for me is also spiritual.
Well, and what also might be interesting then, because the moment then grown-ups start playing, releasing their inner child, it's sort of like also going back in time, going back to a moment in time that you felt safe and happy. So there's also maybe that aspect to it then, and then it's still spiritual, absolutely. And how is that for you, Marshall? When people interact or look at your work, what do they get from what they see? Do they get the story that you try to tell? Do they see different things in it?
I think that that's a brilliant question, because a lot of the work itself is coded. And so there's a level of invitation to understand the work, understand the piece, and access to the story or the history of the Ain Adari site itself in order to fully understand where I sit with the work. But within the exhibition, and especially with installs, like, I appreciate that sometimes the work experience can be quite passive, in that you're experiencing the visceral reaction to the work rather than the research embedded within it. And I welcome that, and I think that both sides of the coin have been expressed to me, and I think that's what you mentioned earlier about everyone bringing their own baggage, their own experience, perhaps their own narrative, and then superimposing that to the installation.
Yeah, bringing their own time also. I was also wanted to ask you still, because you created those beautiful glass sculptures, the tier, so to say, and you filmed the process in itself. Can you tell us a little bit more about the choice to film that and make that part of the installation?
So I was very fascinated with glass because it's, inherent properties of mimicking water or looking like water, but at the same time it's something that is very fragile and very dense and very heavy, and so it kind of created the visual renderings of tears without the actual physical properties, which I found as a beautiful metaphor. With the filming process, I really was thinking about how the process could illuminate the tears themselves. So how the screens bleeding the lights into the glass pieces can have a new experience of that process, or kind of the haunting memory of its, fiery beginnings.
Yeah, and of course, because you did so, there are all these moments in time and timing present in your art piece, which makes it also very interesting and interesting to talk about in this panel, actually. And I think the way we are speaking now, it becomes kind of clear that, yes, time is definitely a very interesting aspect and a source of inspiration, and it's there, but it's just not only that. There is so much more to it, to both your works, actually. There are so many more senses that you try to inspire and that you're inspired by, and there are so many more stories told through the art pieces. So I'm not sure if we can only say that temporality is just the inspiration for an artwork, or that's the starting point or the end point. I mean, it is there all the time, all along, and it was there before us, and it was there after us, and I hope it will stay with us for quite some time. I would like to ask if any of the audience members still have questions for either of the artists. Maybe you've seen the pieces and wonder about certain things. Or maybe not. Is there anything that you still would like to add to our lovely discussion?
Well, there is one thing that, as you were talking about the artist and the creativity and related to time,
Yeah.
I remembered something that, basically how we know the story and history is through the artist's work. And I think and artists always reflect the time, as you say, the spirit of the time, the zeitgeist, and how and this is how we now see like the past, like so through the artist's eyes.
Most definitely. And then once this will, at one time, this what you've created will also be the past. And maybe it's already a little bit of past once this exhibition is over, as you said before, Michelle, that it's now on show, people can interact with it, people can experience it, but after it ends, the experience also ends, so it is already kind of a history, but you still take it with you, in your presence at least. I think that's actually a nice way to conclude our session for now. I thank you all so much for your attention, and I thank you too even more for your contribution. It was lovely to talk to you. After this, we're going to have yet another talk with Iman Zidani, and there are more sessions scheduled for tomorrow and then in February again. Thank you so much.